All right, World History, Chapter 28, The Rise of Totalitarianism. How did political and economic challenges in the 1920s and 30s impact different nations? So, Section 1, Post-War Social Changes. What changes did Western society and culture experience after World War I? So, we'll look at the changes. We'll look at literary, artistic trends, and also some advancements in modern scientific thought. And some of these things kind of go hand in hand. So, if we look at changes after World War I, at least in the United States, this period becomes known as the Roaring Twenties. Economically, the United States is doing extremely well, and we'll talk about this a lot more in U.S. history. So I'm going to kind of glance over this because we'll focus, like I said, more on this next year. But it's also known as the Jazz Age, and jazz is a unique American art form, music tradition, and style, but it becomes popular all over the world. And so that's one of the reasons why this gets thrown into world history, because all the things that are happening in the United States in terms of jazz and, for example, the flapper style, that is going to get exported overseas, and you're going to start to see Europeans listening to jazz and dressing like flappers and doing a lot of things that Americans are doing. So the United States is a pretty influential cultural force after World War I, as well as an economic and military force. So it's kind of interesting to see how those things go hand in hand. When we look at women's lives, during the war, they had all kinds of opportunities, not just in the United States, but all around the world. Because it's a total war, you have men who are going off into military service. That leaves job openings for women, and women move into non-traditional female roles. They work in factories, they work the farms, they do all the things that men do. And what happens is when those men return, they are sent back home, especially middle class women sent back home and expecting to become dutiful housewives again. And they kind of like the adventure, they like the excitement. Plus, there's a great deal of confidence built up in that they were able to do all the things that men could do, and they have been told for so long that they couldn't. You throw in there the fact that modern technology is going to create all of these labor-saving devices, the washing machine probably being the most important one. The electric washing machine is going to free up all kinds of time for women in the United States and around the world, and that enables them to follow new pursuits. They can go into charity work, they can go into whatever, but you see more and more women moving into middle class type jobs that are growing because of business. And so they're going to become more politically active, they're going to become more economically independent, and there's all kinds of things that are going to grow out of this. When we look to reactions to the Jazz Age, at least in the United States, prohibition takes place, where the amendment is passed banning the sale and the production and the transportation of alcohol. One of the things that grows out of this is speakeasies. These are these places that illegally serve liquor that are kind of hidden and underground. The other thing that you see is in response to Charles Darwin is an anti-evolutionary movement taking place. And we really see this play out in the United States in what gets nicknamed the Scopes monkey trial. John Scopes is a biology teacher. He is going to teach the theory of evolution in his classroom, which violates the state law. He is arrested, and there's a trial that takes place, and he is convicted. Despite that, though, you continue to see evolution being taught in classrooms because it's the scientific explanation for how things happen. And so this debate is going to continue to kind of play out in the United States, and it's one that's still had today. When we look at literature, this is known as the lost generation. There is a lot of angst, I guess, but also frustration and disillusionment about World War I. You know, there's all these young men who rushed to do military service thinking that they were going to help their side, the good guys, win, and that they were going to defeat the bad guys. And what they found out is that, you know, both sides had good people and bad people, and both sides were justified. And there's, with this loss of life over what they saw as a pointless war, it really causes them to search kind of deep. And so you have T.S. Eliot writing, Ernest Hemingway writing, and one of the most famous from the United States, besides Ernest Hemingway and T.S. Eliot, F. Scott Fitzgerald, where he really captures this in The Great Gatsby and a few other books. The other thing you see is writers beginning to explore the inner workings of the mind. And this kind of grows out of Freud's work that we'll talk about in a little bit in psychoanalysis. And so, for example, Finnegan's Wake is about a guy who is asleep throughout the whole story, and it explores his subconscious mind. The other movement that takes place in the United States is the Harlem Renaissance. This is Langston Hughes, a picture of Langston Hughes, perhaps one of the most famous poets of the Harlem Renaissance. But you see African American community expressing their disillusionment with American society. They had gone off and fought in World War I. They had done their duty, and then they return home, and African American servicemen find themselves relegated still as second-class citizens, that they're not respected, that they don't get the same kind of homecoming that the white soldiers did. And you start to see this expression that takes place of African American culture and African American thought, and what it's like to be African American in the United States. When we look at new scientific theories, you've got Madame Curie and radioactivity. And so that's one of the things that kind of gets developed. We're starting to understand far more about chemistry and science during this period of time. You have Einstein's theory of relativity that E equals mc squared. And so you started to see a better understanding of the universe and how the universe works. Fleming discovers penicillin, and penicillin is mold that grows on bread, essentially. And the fact that it is an antibiotic and it can help make you feel better. And when we look at Freud, Freud is starting the discipline of psychology. I mean, he doesn't start it, but he's going to really take it and make it a profession, I guess. And with his psychoanalysis, he is exploring the role between our conscious, our subconscious, the role between what we know being right and wrong, and what we want to do and would like to do. And so that influences the writers, and when we get to the artists and the painters, it influences artwork as well. For modern art, Matisse is known for these bold colors and brush strokes, and his goal is to really evoke strong emotion, and that's going to disturb people. They're not really a big fan of Matisse and how he is maybe holding the mirror up to our inner emotions a little bit. Picasso is going to experiment with cubism, these shapes and figures and how they can kind of interact and interrelate. And the other movement you see is surrealism. And again, all of these things are taking traditional artwork and calling them into question and trying to push the envelope a little bit on what is conventional artwork and maybe what's going on inside of our minds and inside of our hearts and heads, and whether there is truth or not truth. And again, expressing kind of the feelings of this lost generation. For modern architecture, for the Bauhaus school out of Germany, you start to see these windows and concrete, but not a whole lot of ornamentation along with these buildings. They're pretty plain Janey. When you look at Frank Lloyd Wright in the United States, he's trying to put these buildings inside their natural settings and then incorporate those natural settings into his architecture.